Hello and welcome back. In this video, we are going to learn about lists and loops in Dart. Lists are one of the most commonly used data structures in Dart. They allow us to store multiple values in a single variable and work with them efficiently. After that, we will explore loops, which help us process lists and repeat actions in our code. So let's create a new project and dive into lists and loops. Open CMD and navigate to your project's directory. Then type Dart create loops and lists with underscores between the words. Once the project is created, you can simply type code, loops and lists, and press enter to open it in Visual Studio Code. This does the same job as navigating into the project folder first and then running the code .command. By the way, in CMD, you can press the tab key to autocomplete file and folder names, which can save you time. Once in VS Code, open the loopsandlists.dart file inside bin folder and delete the generated code. As always, we'll start with a main function. Now, let's dive into lists. To create a list that can hold multiple values, you simply use list with a capital L. Next, we need to give a name to our variable. Let's call it things. We'll assign it an empty list, which in Dart is represented by square brackets. This creates an empty list where we can add whatever items we need. For example, we can add string values like hello and world to our list. We can also include integers, doubles, and even Boolean values. Notice that each element in the list is separated by a comma. When we print the things variable, it will display each element in the list in the debug console. In order to print a specific element from the list, you can access it using its index. After the list name, use square brackets and pass the index of the element you want to retrieve. For example, passing 1 will print world to the console because Dart lists are zero-based, meaning indices start at 0. So the index for the first element will be 0, the second element will be 1, and so on. If we want the last element of our list, we would pass index 5. Trying to retrieve an element at an index that doesn't exist will result in an error. For example, if you try to access an element at index 999, Dart will throw a not an inclusive range error. Let's move on to modifying our list. One way to do this is by using the add method. This method is a function that we call on the list to add a new element to the end. Essentially, we are calling a function on the things list to add an item. For example, to add the number 42 to the list, we would write things.add42. This will add 42 to the end of the list. Then we can print the list to see the updated content. It's important to note that add is a function, and we'll explore more about functions in our next video. Just like we can add elements to a list, we can also remove them. Dart provides multiple ways to do this, and two common methods are remove and removeAt. Remove is a function that removes the first occurrence of the specified value from the list. For example, if we have a list and we want to remove the number 23, we call thingsRemove23. If 23 exists in the list, it will be removed. If it's not in the list, nothing happens. On the other hand, removeAt method allows us to remove an element based on its position in the list. Since Dart lists use zero-based indexing, calling thingsRemove@0 will remove the first element of the list. There are many more useful methods for working with lists, but this is a great start. As you practice, you'll discover more ways to manipulate lists effectively. Now let's talk about another powerful concept, loops. Loops allow us to repeat actions without writing the same code multiple times. This is especially useful when working with lists because we often want to go through each element one by one. One of the most common types of loops is the while loop. It keeps running as long as a condition is true. First, we start by writing the while keyword. This tells Dart that we're creating a loop. After that, we add round parentheses where we'll write the loop condition. Finally, we use curly braces to define the block of code that will run repeatedly. To control our loop, we need a variable. Let's create an integer variable I and set it to 0. This variable will help us keep track of how many times the loop runs. Now let's give our loop a stopping condition. We want the loop to run while I is less than 10. This means the loop will continue running until I reaches 10. Inside the loop body, let's print hello. Since the loop repeats, this will print hello multiple times. Right now, this loop will keep printing hello forever because I never changes. This is called an infinite loop, and we need a way to stop it. To prevent an infinite loop, we need to increase I every time the loop runs. Give variable I a new value at the end of the loop, which will be its old value plus 1. If we run our program, we will see the word hello printed 10 times in the debug console. This is cool, but printing the same word multiple times isn't very useful. However, we can make it more interesting by using the variable I inside our print statement. Let's enumerate each iteration by printing the value of I along with the text. As you can see, we get the word iteration, followed by the value of I, ranging from 0 to 9. Before we move on to another loop, I want to show you a shorthand syntax for increasing a variable's value by 1. This is such a common operation that Dart provides a special operator for it, plus plus. Instead of writing I equals I plus 1, we can simply use I plus plus. This does the same thing, but in a more concise way. Now that we've seen how the while loop works, let's take a look at another type of loop, the for loop. The for loop is often more compact and useful when you know exactly how many times you want to repeat a block of code. Let's start by writing the basic structure of a for loop. A for loop has 3 main parts all in one line: the initialization, the condition, and the increment. Here's the basic skeleton. First, we initialize a variable, often I, to control the loop. Let's start with I equals 0, which means the loop will begin from the first iteration. Next, we need to specify the condition that will stop the loop. We want the loop to continue as long as I is less than 10. Now, after each iteration, we need to increase I by 1. We can do this by adding I++ in the third part of the for loop. Don't forget the semicolons. In a for loop, we separate the 3 parts initialization, condition, and increment with semicolons. So after the condition and the increment, we add a semicolon to properly close those parts of the loop. Inside the loop, let's print hello to see the result. This will print hello 10 times. Now let's make it more interesting. Instead of printing hello, we can print iteration followed by the value of I to enumerate the iterations, just like we did with while loop. Now that we understand how loops work, let's put them to good use with lists. We can use loops to easily iterate over the elements in a list and perform actions on each item. This is a great way to process or manipulate list data without writing repetitive code. Before, we created a list that could store values of various data types. You might be surprised, but that's not always very useful. More often, we need to force our lists to only accept specific data types. For example, if we want to create a list that only stores integers, we can specify data type inside diamond brackets right after the word list. This way, we ensure that the list will only accept integers, and Dart will warn us if we try to add anything else. Now, we can populate our list with some random integers. Our loop currently runs 10 times, but the list only has 7 elements. This means 3 iterations are unnecessary. To fix this, we can change the loop condition so it only runs while I is less than 7, which matches the length of our list. Now, the loop will run exactly as many times as there are elements in the list, making it more efficient. As you remember, we can access list elements using their index inside square brackets. Since I changes from 0 to 6 in each iteration, we can retrieve the corresponding element by writing numbers and I inside brackets. Lastly, we can wrap this inside the print function to print each value to the console. That worked just fine, but our code has a problem. What happens when we add more elements to our list and run the program again? The new elements don't get printed. Even worse, if we remove a lot of elements from our list, we could get a range error. The reason is that our loop always runs 7 times, and doesn't consider that the count of list elements might change. To fix this and make our program more robust, instead of using I is less than 7 in the condition, we can refer to the length of our list by writing numbers.length. This will ensure that the loop runs exactly as many times as there are elements in the list, no matter how many elements are added or removed. Now, instead of just printing each element of the list, let's create a slightly more complex program. Let's say we want to sum the elements of our list. First, we create a new integer variable called sum that will store the total value. We initialize it to 0 since we're starting from 0. Now, inside the for loop, we can update the value of sum by adding the elements of the list to it. For each iteration, the value of sum will increase as we add each element. Finally, at the end of the main function, outside of the for loop, let's print the value of sum. This will show us the final total after all the elements have been added up. Let's change the elements of our list to smaller numbers so that we can confirm our program works correctly. We're on the right track. It's always rewarding to see your code running smoothly and giving you the correct results. Keep up the great work. Finally, let's talk about two important statements in loops, break and continue. But before we dive into that, let's modify our list so it stores values from 1 through 10. First, let's explain the break statement. The break statement is used to exit a loop early. For example, if we want to stop the loop when we find a specific value, we can use break. Let's say that if the element of the list at the current iteration is 3, we want to stop the loop. In every other case, we just print the value. We've run into another issue. Inside the string, we want to refer to the element of the numbers list at index I, but Dart thinks we want to print the value of the numbers variable and then add I in square brackets as part of the string. That's not what we want. To tell Dart that we want to execute this as Dart code, rather than just concatenating strings, we can wrap everything we want to execute inside curly braces after the $sign. This tells Dart to evaluate the expression inside the curly braces. After running our program, we see that only 2 elements of the list are printed, and then the program stops. This is because, when the element was equal to 3, the break statement was executed, and the loop stopped iterating. Now, let's simply change the break statement with a continue and run the program again. When we use continue, it skips the current iteration of the loop, but instead of exiting the loop completely like break, it moves on to the next iteration. So, in this case, when the number is 3, the loop skips printing 3 and continues with the next number. Great job, everyone! You've done an awesome job learning about lists, loops, and control flow in Dart. Keep practicing, and don't hesitate to comment below if you have any questions. I'll be happy to help. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. In our next video, we'll dive into functions, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.